Hello, friends, and welcome to Ask a Virginia Woman, the show where we talk power, policy, leadership, and life with the women who are moving the Commonwealth forward. I'm Judy Selzer, co-founder of two sister organizations, the Virginia Women's Foundation and Virginia Women's Voices. Each week, I sit down with bold, brilliant women from across Virginia, and together we turn up the volume on leadership, equity, and courage, one woman's story at a time. I talk with CEOs, community organizers, lawmakers, entrepreneurs, and educators, and I ask questions about how they got here, what challenges they're tackling, and what advice do they have for the rest of us. This week on Ask a Virginia Woman, we're joined by Jamie Lockhart, a passionate advocate for reproductive health and rights and a key leader at Planned Parenthood. With more than a decade of experience in public health and policy, Jamie brings both strategic insight and a deep commitment to expanding access to care for all communities, especially those historically marginalized. In this episode, Jamie shares with us her journey that led her to reproductive rights advocacy, the challenges facing healthcare access across the Commonwealth, and the power of showing up, especially when the stakes are high. So tune in for a candid and inspiring conversation about policy, purpose, and the pursuit of equity. Because when our country and our Commonwealth are facing big questions, sometimes the best thing to do is ask a Virginia woman. So Jamie, we are so excited to have you here today and really appreciate you taking the time in what is always a very challenging and busy week for Planned Parenthood. So tell us a little bit about yourself and your leadership journey. How did you get here? How did you become the head of Planned Parenthood across Virginia and do all this great policy work?
Thank you, Judith. Thank you so much for having me. And I do want to start off by acknowledging how challenging a week it has been for so many reasons. I think, chiefly seeing the U.S. House of Representatives pass a bill that will defund Planned Parenthood, that will strip healthcare through Medicaid from millions of Americans, that will cut nutritional assistance programs. Also, Congressman Jerry Connolly passed away this week, who has been such a tireless champion for Virginians and for reproductive health care access as well. And so I think there have just been a lot of challenging moments this week, but
It's been a very hard week, and appreciate you so much still showing up and talking with us when there are so many challenges going on.
Yes. Well, unfortunately, I feel like we're bracing for more to come. So I'm glad to have this conversation today. And I've been proud to be with Planned Parenthood Advocates of Virginia for the last 5.5 years, and it has been a, a great, stressful, amazing place to be during this challenging time. And I think about it as an opportunity to bring together a lot of my passions, both my kind of personal commitment to reproductive freedom and healthcare access, as well as professionally the ability to do policy work, advocacy work, and electoral work kind of under one organization has been also a dream come true. And so I'm a former Planned Parenthood patient. I very distinctly remember visiting Planned Parenthood as an 18-year-old who was worried about becoming pregnant and who was there for me in that moment. I remember also when I was, I think I was 17 years old, I attended the March for Women's Lives in 2004. And that being, I took a bus from Richmond to DC to be there. And I think about that as a moment that I will also remember, of kind of seeing so many women come together to fight back at that time. And so my journey from growing up in Chesterfield County to going to James Madison University, and then I did various political and policy advocacy work. And so I've been thrilled to be at Planned Parenthood Advocates of Virginia and to bring that experience together. And I think so many women spend so much time thinking about reproductive health care. And so it is an honor and privilege to be able to fight for Virginians to make sure that we have that health care protected.
And it sounds like your story, one where the personal really is political. I mean, you shared you're a patient of Planned Parenthood, you volunteered, you've gone on, marches with them, and now you're the statewide policy, executive director leading this really important movement across the Commonwealth. Do you see that similar story in many of your volunteers and donors and team members, right? That they started out as volunteers and patients as well. What common threads have you seen across the movement here in the Commonwealth?
Absolutely. We know that 1 out of 3 women, 1 out of 4 people across the country have visited a Planned Parenthood at some point during their lifetime. And I think that that's the case as well in Virginia, where we see so many people started off as Planned Parenthood patients. So many people have a connection to this work. And as I mentioned, just reproductive health care is so central to our lives. And so one of the great pleasures I have at being in this role is people tell me their healthcare stories, because people know that I've heard lots of people's stories, and they know that I'm going to receive them and not make any judgment about what they share with me. And so it's such a pleasure to hear people's stories about moments of relief, maybe difficult decisions or heartbreaking stories, but I think, yeah, so many people have connections to Planned Parenthood because of receiving health care there or supporting a loved one who received health care there.
And it seems like to do the work that you do, you have to show up with such empathy every day to hear these stories, to be there in that trusted space for other community members. And also, it's a daily courageous stand for equity. Was there something in your formative years, your early years, that you think prepared you for this? I mean, this is not a job for those easily intimidated, easily tired. I mean, you shouldn't have to come to work every day, dressed literally and figuratively in this armor, but what got you here? I mean, how did you get prepared to take on such a big, enormous responsibility?
Thank you. I think, um, growing up, I'm not sure that I had the language for kind of what equity means. And I think about how I grew up in a community that was relatively homogeneous in the sense of relatively politically conservative, um, lack of diversity generally, lack of racial, ethnic, religious diversity in this community that I grew up in. And so I think, again, didn't have that language early on. One thing that my friends and family would probably point to as formative was I was an animal rights activist as an 11-year-old, and I remember thinking through, okay, just kind of in those years, okay, I have this dog, I love this dog, and then okay, we're eating these other animals, and thinking through that, I think I started to ask tough questions of my family, friends, people at school about their values and their judgment. And so I think I became more comfortable asking tough questions and having tough
Yeah.
conversations. And then I don't think it was until college and after, and I took a graduate course that was really transformative on race inequality in American democracy with Professor Khalil Mohammed, where I think thinking through and looking at the history of race in America and how systemic oppression and what I think I was often taught in school that, these things happened years ago, but, everything's okay now.
Yeah.
And so I think really having to relearn myself and think about these systems, and now, learning just how the systemic oppression is, as it says, systemic, it's everywhere. And so I think really thinking more about equity and how we show up. And I think also not only being able to ask tough questions and have difficult conversations, but thinking through how do we use the power that we have and the roles that we have to really challenge the status quo.
And that is just so important what you're talking about, that intersection of race and gender and economic justice and the privilege we bring as white women to this work and needing to use that privilege for good and not for bad, and to also create space and pass the mic and accept that a lot of what we were taught growing up is actually quite inaccurate. And so how are we furthering harm or undoing harm? How are we showing up in a space that is creating change? And this isn't a straight line. This isn't always easy work, and we don't get it right. I mean, some of the biggest lessons I know I've learned in my life of where I've got it wrong, where I've made a mistake, where I have failed, grow through setbacks. So tell us a little bit about, maybe an instance where you had grow through a setback, whether it was a policy challenge or a difficult conversation. Some of our biggest lessons in leadership are where we didn't get it right and we had to course correct.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely have made lots of mistakes. And I think the ones that have stuck with me the most when I think about them are involving people, when I've disappointed people. Um, and I think one of the biggest lessons I've learned is that, especially when you're in a leadership position, people are always watching and listening, and they're
They
always
are.
evaluating not just what you say, but how you say it. And I think one of the hardest lessons I've learned is that I might not have fully thought out what I'm about to say to somebody, but every single word that I say, they're going to remember, and they're going to remember not only what I said, but how that made them feel. And so that I need to make sure when I'm having a difficult conversation with somebody that I am fully present, that I am not only thinking about what I'm going to say, but how it's going to be received. And I think, especially when it comes to giving challenging feedback, or in particular, I remember one conversation that I had where I had a teammate who was applying for a promotion, and we decided that we were going to bring in somebody else for that role. And that was really tough. And I remember how I was on the road when I delivered that news, and it was tough news for this person to receive no matter what, but also this person felt very disrespected that I was not like in a safe place at my computer to share this news. And that was something where I was like, oh wow, I should have thought more about how disrespectful that was, that I was not in a that I didn't put myself in their shoes on how this news is going to be delivered, and that this is going to be really tough. And so I need to be in a space where they feel like I am fully present when delivering that information.
And I imagine you've taken that and now applied that moving forward, not just in situations about work, but elsewhere in all of your daily interactions, because that feedback about how we have hurt somebody, how our actions have impacted somebody else, are some of our greatest lessons in leadership.
Yes, absolutely. And I do try to operate with a growth mindset. And I try to do things that make me nervous, that I'm going to worry about saying the wrong thing, because I think, those are the moments where you learn and you grow. And just acknowledging that when you are out of your comfort zone and when you are challenging yourself, and, being okay with messing up so that you can learn from it and do better in the future.
And so, how does that show up in some of the daily conversations and coalitions and projects you're working on, where we're really in a wide spectrum of political, economic, racial, gender, economic circumstance, so many different things? Like, we all have a very different world perspective because our experiences are different, and we can't only make change by talking to those who agree with us. So, how in such politically divisive times are you? Leaning into hard conversations with people who see the world differently than you? How do you build trust? How do you build movement forward when we don't always agree?
Yeah, I want to first acknowledge that it's really tough. I think
Yeah.
it's it's so hard, and I think I try to show up and listen more than I'm talking, try to understand, try to ask questions to understand, not come in with, all the solutions or ideas. And I think also really thinking about the value of other lived experience, and recognizing that, there are, audiences that I might be the best person to talk to, but there are a lot of audiences that I'm not the best person to talk to. And so making sure that deferring to those that have experience with different communities, and just making sure that there's space for to learn from others, and acknowledging, that there's a lot of things that I don't know.
Yeah. No, that's I think key, that vulnerability and that humbleness and understanding we don't know everything, right? And in every conversation, it's an opportunity to learn something new. And I see you doing that, showing up in spaces with that understanding that, hey, I'm going to listen, I'm going to learn, and sometimes we're going to agree, and sometimes we're going to see things a little bit differently. But the goal here still remains: how do we move forward together? Um, what are some of the ways that you're inspired during these challenging times? What are some of the ways that you really see community members showing up, leaning into their voice, to their power, and taking big steps forward? I mean, it's not all bad. There's a lot that is scary and depressing and frustrating and really harmful, but there's some good stuff going on too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you do have to focus on the positive, and you have to celebrate moments and look at the good, because otherwise, it is really hard to do this work in this moment. I think about a number of things. I think about the Reproductive Freedom Amendment and just the victory that we had this year at first passage, and
Whoop, whoop.
very
Yep,
excited.
that's awesome. So
I
excited.
have my Reproductive Freedom 2026 shirt on
Awesome.
today, and I think just so excited about that opportunity, and that we have the ability to protect rights, even while we're dealing with all these federal attacks. I think other things that give me hope and inspiration are working with young people in general, the college students that we work with, when I've gone to events with young people who are just so excited, and ready to fight back. That gives me a lot of hope. And then I think also I am excited and inspired by a number of people running for office, and just all the people stepping up and raising their hand to serve. And one of the things that I get to do as executive director of Planned Parenthood Advocates of Virginia is I get to participate in a lot of candidate endorsement
Mm.
interviews. And so a lot of my May and June is spent in 30-minute Zoom rooms where I'm meeting with candidates and their campaign managers and asking them questions about their commitment to reproductive freedom. And I got to say, I've met with a lot of candidates who are running in pretty tough districts, pretty red districts. So, their chances are slim, but hearing what motivated them to run and why they're stepping up, even in areas of the state where they're unlikely to win, has been really inspiring.
Mm. And so you were talking about also at the beginning of this section a reproductive freedom amendment that you had some success with this legislative session, but it's not done yet. The journey is still long with that. Can you
Yes.
tell our listeners a bit more about what's happening there, educate them a bit on that process? Because that's a biggie.
Absolutely. So the Virginia Right to Reproductive Freedom Amendment is an initiative to enshrine reproductive freedom, a broad protection of rights into Virginia's Constitution. So it would protect contraception, abortion, infertility care, miscarriage management, prenatal, postpartum, and childbirth in Virginia's Constitution. Right now, Virginia is known as a key access state for abortion access and reproductive health care, but we don't actually have any sort of protections. And so it's critical that we enshrine in Virginia's Constitution these rights for decades to come. And it is a long process. Virginia is not one of the states where you can get a bunch of signatures and get an initiative on the ballot. In order to qualify for the ballot and to amend the Constitution of Virginia, you have to pass a resolution through the Virginia House of Delegates and the state Senate twice with an intervening election, and then it goes on the ballot. And so in 2025, this legislative session, we passed through the Virginia House and Senate. We have this upcoming Virginia House of Delegates election. In order for it to be successful in 2026, we need to retain a pro-reproductive rights majority in our state house, and then it goes back through the legislature during the January 2026 session, and then Virginians finally get to vote on it November 2026, or starting in September when early voting starts. And so it is a long, complicated process, intentionally so. Um, it's difficult to amend Virginia's constitution. And so very excited about this opportunity. We know that over 60% of Virginians want to see this happen. And so thrilled that it's looking like they will have that opportunity soon.
Well, thank you for your tremendous work on that. And I know there's a big coalition working alongside with Planned Parenthood to make this happen. What does it take to get into this work? Whether it as an organizer, as a executive director like you, as a lobbyist, as a candidate for office, what advice do you have for others that are looking to lean into this kind of leadership in their professional life and have a paid job in this field and work? What advice do you have for folks? Whether they're 21 and graduating college, whether they are 50 and looking for a career shift, what advice do you have for folks who say, I think I want to do this as a job?
Yeah, I think my number one advice is just to show up. I started showing up as a 16-year-old. I started going to Virginia Young Democrats events, and then when I was in college, I started doing that. I remember interning on Tim Kaine's campaign for governor, where a lot of it was just being willing to be there to volunteer, where I would sign in people at things, I would go knock on doors. And it took me a while to actually realize that it was a career path. And I thought like, oh, I'm really passionate about this, I'm going to do these things. And it also took me a while to recognize that people would kind of count that experience that I did volunteering or interning towards, starting a career. So I kind of thought that I had to do all those things, and then I had to kind of work my way up, and didn't realize that people would give me opportunities because they saw me at all these other things. And so I think, a lot of this work, especially the political work, is done by volunteers. And so, being willing to get involved in a local party committee, or, serving as a precinct captain, and getting some of that experience, if you can get it, part-time while doing other things, that is then transferable into a career in this field.
And why do you think it's so important for women in particular to lean in and raise their voices in this time? I mean, it's 2025. Are we not done with, this equity thing? I say sarcastically because you and I both know we're not. But tell our listeners a bit more about this. Why in this moment is it so important for women and girls to, use their voices to call for the world that they want?
I mean, it's absolutely critical. I will say one thing that is exciting is that Virginia will have its first woman as governor come
Yes.
2026. So that is huge.
Yep. No matter who is elected, it is a woman.
Right. And also wild in, Virginia's long history. I think, we know that women have taken on so much responsibility when it comes to organizing, when it comes to kind of families. And I think, women have such a appreciation for challenges, when it comes to public policy challenges that impact everyday life. And so I think it's so critical when women are at the table making these decisions. And I think, we're seeing the detriment of that federally, when we see right now who's making these decisions to strip people of their health care, food assistance, dismantling of the federal government that is going to have, a profound harmful impact on the lives of women and families across the country.
How do you stay grounded through all of this? I mean, what's your outlet on those? What feels like every day is just gets harder than the one before. So, how do you keep showing up and stay connected to your values and just have some, I don't even respite from all of this?
Yeah, I would say two things. When it comes to the work itself, I think really making everything come back to the patients and who I'm fighting for, that this is about people's direct access to healthcare. This is about people being able to control their health, their bodies, their futures. And so I think, when it's tough, going back to the, who should be centered in all of this work. I think personally, I have to, I know that I have to do certain things to keep myself kind of mentally healthy. And a lot of that has to do with what I do physically. So like I am one of those people that wakes up at 5 or 6 a.m. to go for a run or a workout. I know that I have to eat healthy, and I've been through those periods of time where I'm not eating well, I'm not moving, and I know how my body reacts to that stress. And so it's kind of like the on the airplane when they say you have to put on, you
Yeah.
know, your face mask, whatever, what do they call it, air mask before helping others. So just I think I've learned what I have to do for myself, and that if I'm not getting enough sleep, if I'm not taking care of myself, then I'm not a nice person to be around, and I'm not going to be able to adequately manage the stress.
Where in life did you learn that, right? Like, is that a recent lesson or is that something you developed really early on and it sustained you? For folks who are, trying to figure this out from themselves, because each person's, traditions and rituals for how they take care of themselves and put that oxygen mask on so that way they can be resilient. We learn it at different stages. Where did that show up for you?
Yes, an oxygen mask is the right term. Thank you for that. I think it was sometime, after I had worked for a little while. I think of, so in 2011, I had a very stressful year. I was working on Capitol Hill, and then I was part of some layoffs after the Republicans took control as a result of the 2010 kind of
Mm-hmm.
shellacking that happened. And so I was looking for a new job, and then I started managing a Virginia House of Delegates race that year. And I think about it as one of the most stressful things that I did, in that, um, you know, taking on an incumbent, being however old I was in my early 20s, managing a campaign. And I remember I didn't typically drink soda, but in the office that I was working in, there was a fridge with soda. And I remember there were days when I said, I haven't had food yet today, so here's 200 calories. Like, that's fine. And I was just very unhealthy because I was so focused on what I needed to do. And I remember my eye would start twitch. Like, I would have periods of time where my eye would just
Yeah.
twitch. And I realized, wow, there is a physical response to the stress that you're under and you're not taking care of yourself. And so I did campaigns in 2011, 2012, and 2013. And I remember attending a retreat geared towards women through an organization called Bossed Up in 2013. And I think I really had a moment where I thought about, I need to really take control of my health. And I decided I was going to try to get a certification to teach group fitness. It was at that point that I really thought a lot about, how do I move out of political campaigns into something that's a little bit more sustainable. And that's when I decided to try to move into advocacy work, which I would say, like, depending on who you're working for,
Not
it's
be all
not
that
that
more
different.
sustainable, but yeah, I get the
Right.
thinking.
Right. And I think, yeah, trying to take control more of my own health. And I have seen so much of a difference on just, like, you can't work 7 days a week for 10 hours a day and think that it's going to be sustainable for a long term.
And so, as we kind of wrap up, you take these lessons about life and leadership and health and resiliency and courageous, leadership. What are maybe your key two or three thoughts that you want to share with others who, are thinking like, gosh, I need a philosophy around this. So, Jamie, what's your philosophy on life and leadership and health? What do you have that kind of gets you through it all?
Yeah, I think one piece of advice that I got when I was a young staffer on Capitol Hill that I think about often is that you don't have to know all the answers to everything. You need to know who you can ask to get the answers.
Oh,
And
that's a
I
good
think
one. Yeah.
and I think often about how do I surround myself with people who can help me? How do I, be open about the fact that I don't know everything, but how do we do things in partnership? And I think that's even more critical now with everything that's going on and all the attacks. It's just like, how do we come together and make things happen? And And I think, encouraging um, young folks to, not think that you have to know everything, that you have to have all of these skills before you jump into something, because I think you can learn so much from those around you, and being willing to be very open about what you don't know.
Good advice. Well, we love to always close out with asking who we should pass the mic to. So, you have worked with and mentored so many inspiring women, and you've been mentored by so many as well. So, who's another Virginia woman or girl that you think we should invite to this show? And maybe what's a powerful question or two that you'd want to ask them?
Yeah, this is a great question, and I could say a lot of different folks. Someone who comes to mind for me is State Delegate Candy Munden King, who I think has been such a courageous leader. And if you watch the House of Delegates floor, which I recognize, many people probably don't, but maybe listeners to this podcast are more likely to watch it. She often stands up and challenges authority and challenges kind of the way of thinking, and is also somebody who is willing to push back. And so I think it would be great to ask her about where that comes from, and whether she feels nervous or fear, before she
Yeah.
stands up to kind of challenge authority in the status quo.
Well, thank you. We will definitely invite her to the show. And that is a great question because sometimes, we think folks are just so solid and rocks, but they can feel fear too. But they just go ahead and ask the tough questions anyhow. And Jamie, that's you. You're out there every day asking the tough questions, doing the tough work, and fighting for all of our rights and access to healthcare. So thank you for all you do at Planned Parenthood and all that Planned Parenthood does. It's been a pleasure to have you on our Ask a Virginia Woman show. And listeners, that's it for this episode of Ask a Virginia Woman. And if you enjoyed today's conversation, don't forget to subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And we'll continue to ask big questions and invite you to keep listening, keep reflecting, and keep engaging in what matters to you. We do hope this show inspires you to believe in your own leadership and helps you connect with women who, like you, are leading us forward. Because leadership really is about showing up, sharing your story, listening to and learning from others, and then together we can shape the future. And here on Ask a Virginia Woman, we'll keep spotlighting the stories that move us toward a more inclusive and resilient world. So until next time, stay bold, stay curious, and remember, when in doubt, ask a Virginia woman. So thank you again, Jamie, for being with us here today.
My pleasure.